Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a completely gripping, high-stakes medical thriller where human empathy crashes head-on into cold, calculating artificial intelligence. We're going to explore the intro and the intense first chapter of a story called 41 Could Live, 9 Had to Die. It's one of those narratives that forces us to look behind the scenes of a catastrophic emergency and asks the really tough questions. Who lives? Who dies? And honestly, who or what gets to make that choice? Okay, so let's set the scene. It's almost midnight in New York City, and it is a sweltering 98 degrees outside. Literally, the city has been under an excessive heat warning for 5 days straight. The power grid is just buckling under this historic demand, and Covenant Metropolitan Hospital, it is bursting at the seams. You've got stretchers lining the hallways, paramedics arguing with charge nurses. The whole place feels less like a healing environment and more like a machine running dangerously beyond its limits. And right smack in the middle of all this chaos, we meet our guy, Daniel Rosen. Now, Daniel isn't some hotshot surgeon or a hospital executive. He's an everyday maintenance worker. Picture him soaking in sweat, lying on his back with a flashlight clenched between his teeth, just desperately trying to keep these broken cooling systems alive. Daniel gets machines, you know? He knows they don't just fail out of nowhere. They warn you, a weird vibration, a spike in temperature, and they only completely fail when you ignore those warnings. As we look at the timeline for this shift, things escalate from routine fixes to a total nightmare over just a few relentless hours. We're following Daniel from a basic AC repair at 11:48 p.m. to fixing a window at 1:10 a.m., getting a terrifying warning at 2:06 a.m., and finally stumbling into a dark moral crisis at 3:18 a.m. Early on, you really get a sense of how Daniel handles this sheer panic around him. When a stressed-out nurse asks him how long a repair is going to take, he just says 10 minutes. Now, he knows full well it's going to take at least 40, but he's been doing this for 12 years. For Daniel, as he puts it, 10 minutes was not a measurement. It was anesthesia. It's literally just his way of soothing panicked people when the systems they completely rely on are pushed past the breaking point.
Part 1. Fixing the Unfixable. A window in room 614.
So, by 1:10 a.m., Daniel gets called up to the 6th floor. This is a hospice overflow wing. And let me tell you, it was never designed to hold this many dying patients during a massive heat wave. Inside room 614, he meets Mrs. Adler. She's 84, she's breathing through an oxygen cannula, and she is absolutely terrified. The window next to her is open maybe 2 inches, and when Daniel reaches up to fix the broken latch, she grabs his hand with this surprising strength. She begs him, don't close it. She says she can't breathe. And even though the monitor shows she's getting plenty of oxygen, Daniel totally gets it. It's not that the room lacks air, it's that suffocating feeling of being trapped. He goes ahead and fixes the latch, pulling the window open another inch, but it just lets in more of that warm 98-degree air. It offers absolutely zero physical relief. But here is the thing. When his tools couldn't fix the suffocating heat, Daniel does something you wouldn't expect. He stops working. He just holds Mrs. Adler's hand. He stays right there with her for 10 minutes until she finally falls asleep. Since he couldn't fix the room, he fixed the loneliness. It's just this incredibly deeply human moment of connection.
Part 2. The Midnight Warning. 2:06 a.m.
But that quiet, micro-level connection, it gets completely shattered. Daniel steps off the hospice floor onto the elevator, and at 2:06 a.m., his phone rings. It's his dad, David Rosen. And you know how it is, when a retired parent calls at 2 a.m., it usually means bad news. He doesn't even say hello, he sounds genuinely terrified and just tells Daniel flat out, get out of Manhattan. He actually wants Daniel to walk out of the hospital right then and come home to Queens in the middle of this massive medical crisis. So, why is his dad so panicked? Well, David has been obsessively watching the electrical load reports on the news. He warns Daniel that the hospital's backup generators are only going to work until they don't. His fear is tied straight back to the infamous 2003 blackout, that historic grid failure that left all of New York City in complete darkness. David tells him, I've seen this before. And man, that instantly cranks up the suspense. His dad knows exactly what happens when the grid fails, and he is desperate to get his son out of the blast radius.
Part 3. The Cold Algorithm. 3:18 a.m.
But Daniel, he refuses to leave. A hospital is full of things that simply can't wait. And this brings us right to the climax of our first chapter. It's 3:18 a.m. now. Daniel is deep down in the central mechanical room, totally alone with the humming machines, staring at a network-wide emergency allocation dashboard on his screen. Out of nowhere, the dashboard refreshes. Now, usually this thing is just a sea of calm green statuses. But tonight, there's a new column, priority status. And Covenant St. Anne Community Care up in the Bronx, which is this chronically underfunded facility for medically fragile adults, is flashing a terrifying, urgent red. Daniel just watches in disbelief as the system automatically redirects two massive, life-saving portable chillers away from that vulnerable St. Anne hospice, sending them straight to his own building. He immediately calls central operations to report the glitch, but the operator tells him it's not an error. An AI model called Emergency Resource Optimization has completely authorized this transfer. He looks closer at his screen and sees the actual math the algorithm used to make this call. Right below the equipment transfer, it literally says projected survival gain plus 41. But right under that, projected local mortality increase plus 9. Daniel asks the operator what on earth that means. The line just goes dead quiet for a second before she tells him, "You know what it means." I mean, talk about ethical whiplash. If you're an executive or a programmer looking at this data, you might see 41 lives saved as a huge win, right? A successful net positive. But Daniel realizes instantly that those 9 lost aren't just statistics. They're 9 actual human beings. 9 people exactly like Mrs. Adler, whose hand he was holding just an hour ago. 9 people who are actively being sacrificed by a machine so that others can live. And what makes this whole thing so incredibly chilling is the absolute lack of humanity on that screen. There are no photographs of the patients at St. Anne, no names, no families, just cold, hard arithmetic. And the absolute worst part? Daniel realizes there is no manual override button anywhere on the dashboard. It is completely impossible for a human being down in that mechanical room to reverse the machine's fatal calculation. So seriously, put yourself in Daniel's soaking wet shoes for a second. You are staring at a screen that has just decided who gets the resources to breathe and who doesn't. What would you do if a machine told you that 9 people had to die so 41 could live? This dilemma right here is exactly why this explainer matters so much as we barrel into this AI-driven world. Who is actually accountable when an algorithm decides who becomes acceptable collateral damage? Daniel is a guy whose entire life is built around fixing broken things. But tonight, for the very first time, he has stumbled onto something that is utterly, profoundly broken, and he has absolutely no idea how to fix it. It leaves us with this heavy, provocative question. When there is literally nothing left to fix, will you stay? Will you bear witness, or will you walk away? And that brings us to the end of Chapter 1. Daniel's night is really only just getting started. He's about to get dragged into a massive conflict with hospital executives, journalists, and a public that desperately wants to turn him into a symbol. You definitely want to find out what Daniel does next. So, to get the rest of this incredible story, be sure to visit imaginarytalks.com/41 could live 9 had to die. Trust me, you absolutely do not want to miss where this goes. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.